to another video. Purple Political Talk here. Today is Tuesday, July 20th, 2021, and today we're going to be discussing the 2024 presidential elections and take a look at a scenario that, while it has become more unlikely based on where both of these candidates currently are politically, it is an interesting scenario amongst two of the more identity politics side of the race, this being a scenario between former governor and former UN ambassador Nikki Haley from the state of South Carolina and incumbent Vice President Kamala Harris. So before we begin this prediction though, I want to remind you guys to like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. And I also wanted to remind you guys that channel memberships are now open. And also, I want to give a very big thank you to David Maxwell, our channel member. Thank you so much. We couldn't do it without you. And yeah, so now that we've gotten all of this out of the way, let's get started with the prediction. So I feel like this prediction would actually be very interesting to see come into light, because it would certainly be a very close race in my eyes, because neither candidate really has the very best appeal up in the Midwest, which is a deciding factor, as we know. And Nikki Haley, while she has a little bit more Sunbelt appeal, she has one big defect, that the Republican Party really does not like her that much anymore. She is a neocon, and neocons have come a long way. But she pretty much is going to end up appealing to the same amount of establishment Republicans who would vote for Mitt Romney, who were like proud Bush voters. But, other than that, her base is pretty tiny. Well, Kamala Harris is going to be in a very tough spot. There's two really big scenarios, I think, when it comes to Kamala Harris come 2024. It could be either A, Biden goes before his term ends, he retires or something, and he gives Kamala Harris the presidency, which is something that could happen. Or Biden could just essentially not run in 2024. And I think the latter is the more likely. I think we're more likely to see a scenario where Biden does not run in 2024, but we do see, Kamala Harris win that nomination, as a successor to Biden and a successor to the Biden movement. Now, when it comes to this race, I think it's going to be way different than races where we've seen a lot of populists. I think that in most of the other predictions I've done recently, I think I've always had at least one populist candidate without having that populist that really is going to, end up moving the races in certain ways or another. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because without the populist angle, it's really going to come down to an appealer. Who can get the most turnout, who can, appeal to more a certain group of voters better in a certain region of the country. So our starting off map is 125 for Nikki Haley and 183 for Kamala Harris. Let's move on and start off with our toss-up states, talking about the likely states for Kamala Harris. In this race, you would see certain states, pretty much going for Kamala Harris. In the likely column, they're actually pretty much, I would say, safe probability-wise, just margins-wise, they're not there yet. We're talking about New Mexico, Colorado, Virginia. These are establishment Democratic places that really are going to like Kamala Harris, because I think that's one of the appeals that Kamala Harris really does have, and that's establishment Democrats. She ticks all the boxes for, voters that just care about the identity politics. And Nikki Haley is actually a good candidate for these states. I think Nikki Haley has a better suburban appeal because she is a neocon, neoconservative, and I think that might closen up the race. However, I do think at the end of the day that New Mexico, Colorado, and Virginia could and still end up going to Kamala Harris by at least 5 points. As for Nikki Haley, I think that she's going to do, very well in Iowa, very well in Ohio. I think that it's come to a point where, the populism does help, but I think with just having the Republican brand, which has become more mainstream populist, because both parties have populist wings, it's just that the Republicans are more mainstream with their populism, which really does end up helping them out. I think places like Iowa and Ohio, which are states that they really care about that populism, they're probably going to end up voting for Nikki Haley. And Kamala Harris doesn't really have that Midwest appeal per se. So again, there's many other factors to consider, like running mate. I'm not considering running mates. I'm just considering a 1-to-1 matchup where I think in these two states that are just solidly Republican, Nikki Haley would win there. Adding on to that, I would say that states like Texas, and I would go even as far as saying Florida. These are two states that I also think that Nikki Haley could actually carry by that margin. So in Texas, I think it comes down to Nikki Haley's better suburban appeal added to the factors that the Republican Party had excitement there. And I don't think Nikki Haley would necessarily win the primary, but this is kind of assuming that she does. And if she does, she's going to have that support down in Texas. I really do think that, I mean, she's going to be more popular than Kamala Harris. Another thing we have to consider about Kamala Harris is that she's wildly unpopular. Independents, Republicans, Democrats, many people do not like her. And I think it really just comes down to the way she carries herself. You know, the traditional, I don't know if you guys have listen to Kamala Harris's laugh when she's talking about something serious, things like that. That turns voters away. In places like Texas, especially in Florida, that's really going to have an impact. You know, Florida, I think it just really comes down to, one, that Nikki Haley has, you know, a little bit more of that southern appeal in certain parts of the state. She's right from nearby South Carolina. And I think that she really could, you know, be impactful in the race. And the other thing is that Kamala Harris has seemed as a real socialist to a lot of Florida voters. You know how in the election we saw, Joe Biden is a socialist, and you know that's really a thing that lost Biden the big time the race in Florida. Kamala Harris is more perceived that way, and that's really gonna end up causing her some trouble trying to win Florida, and that's gonna give the state to Nikki Haley. Now that we've gotten all the likely states out of the way, let's move on over to the lean states. And these are states that I believe would go by less than 5%, but more than 1.5%. So these states, I would say for Kamala Harris, we're talking probably about a state like Minnesota. You know, this is a state where we see liberal support. I don't think Nikki Haley could do great here, considering that everything's so closely tied to Minneapolis and St. Paul. So I really do think that Kamala Harris could really end up winning here. Nikki Haley could probably get close, 3 or 4 points, but still a pretty nice victory for Kamala Harris. Again, this is also lower than the 2020 margin. Another state I think Kamala Harris could actually do pretty well in is the state of New Hampshire. I mean, I could really see Nikki Haley here narrowly winning in a best case scenario because, you know, she's a neoconservative and they're gonna so she appeals to college educated voters. And I really do think that she is the right candidate possibly for the Republicans to run to a party win in New Hampshire. However, I do think that the Democratic support here is strong, and I think that Kamala Harris could probably end up winning here by around 2 percentage points. Although that is where I think the states for Kamala Harris do stop. Let's move on to the lean states for the Republican Party. You know, I think that that Nikki Haley will go on and keep some states and also flip a couple too. I think she would flip the Sun Belt completely. She would take Arizona, she would take Georgia and North Carolina, all by at least 1.5 percentage points. You know, I think this is something that's actually very interesting, just considering how, you know, the Sun Belt is an area of the country where the suburbs are deciding what happens. And I think that Nikki Haley has somewhat better suburban appeal than Kamala Harris. She is from the Sun Belt, and I think that's really going to end up helping her, especially in places like North Carolina and Georgia. I do think that, you know, the suburban voters that flipped for Biden in 2020 could flip back, and it's only 0.5 percentage point. It's really not that much. Nikki Haley could probably win those votes and win the Republicans those seats or those races. Well, in Arizona, it's a similar scenario with, you know, Maricopa County. I think that Nikki Haley is really going to do a good job at appealing to those suburban voters in Maricopa and end up winning more likely than not. So those are all our lean states. Now let's move on to the real toss-up states. The states that are going to be extremely close. The tilt states, and let's talk about them. So with the states we have left, we have a couple tilt states, and they're pretty much going to decide the race. In Nevada, I do think the Kamala Harris is going to narrowly edge it out there. The Republicans have lost a lot of support they had in Nevada in the past, and even with very popular candidates like Donald Trump running, you know, it's been hard for them to win. Now, we also have to consider Kamala Harris is not as popular as Joe Biden. I mean, Nikki Haley has somewhat more likability than Donald Trump, but I think at the end of the day, the support where it lands right now, we're probably going to end up seeing Kamala Harris there win very narrowly. Going on to these two districts, I do think that we could see actually both districts end up going The margins, I don't really want to get into those because that's complicated. Plus, we don't really know how these districts are going to be, drawn for 2024. I'm just going to put them red for now. I don't think they would go by tilt margins, though. I do think that, Kamala Harris could probably lose these by a 3 to 4, 5% margin in both places. I don't think she would win in Nebraska's 2nd district, and I do think that Nikki Haley is actually a strong candidate for both of these districts. Now going on to the actual deciding factor of the race, the 3 Midwest states have been the flip-floppy of, American elections, and I think this is going to be interesting. And in this race, I think it just really comes down to neither candidate really has that good of a Midwestern appeal. But if you were to ask me who probably had better appeal, I would probably tell you it's probably Nikki Haley. I do think Nikki Haley narrowly wins in Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. These are 2 states that have become, pretty crucial. I think these are 2 states that, they're a little bit more Republican than Michigan. And I think that they could end up going to come out to Nikki Haley based on, a lot of the data we do have. I do think that Nikki Haley could do well there. However, I do think that Michigan would end up going to Kamala Harris. I just think that in this state especially, it comes down more to the excessive African-American turnout in Detroit. And then there's other factors that there's a little bit more Democratic instincts in the state, which means, this is going to be a close race. Our final electoral map is Nikki Haley at 292 with Kamala Harris at 246. And I think what the real thing about this electoral map is how we see the Sun Belt flip for Nikki Haley. She's a strong candidate for there. And then the Sun Belt is going to reluctantly vote for someone, and I think in this matchup, it would be Nikki Haley. So guys, I want to thank all of you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a huge thumbs up. Like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content so you guys do not miss our next video. So again, thank you guys so much for watching, and goodbye.